Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're turning our focus to a crisis that is just overwhelming in its scale and complexity.
It really is.
And frankly, it's one that demands so much more global attention than it's getting. The civil war in Sudan, the
Well,
speed at which everything has just dissolved there. It's staggering.
that's the critical point. I mean, other conflicts are dominating the headlines,
Yeah.
but the sheer volume of suffering and, the geopolitical risk coming out of Sudan is immense.
So that's our mission for this deep dive.
Exactly. We want to give you that necessary structured understanding. So, drawing only from our sources, we're going to synthesize the political and military roots, detail the just devastating humanitarian consequences, and really map out why a resolution is so incredibly challenging.
Okay, so let's start with the basics, just to set the stage. This whole conflict really ignited back in April 2023.
That's right.
And it's a fight between the two most powerful armed groups in the country who were, at least on paper, supposed to be partners. You have the Sudanese Armed Forces, the SAF, and then the Paramilitary Rapid Support Forces, the RSF.
And if you unpack that political dynamic, you realize this isn't just a military split. It is a pure, brutal power struggle.
So what was the trigger, the one thing that broke it all?
Well, the specific issue was this disagreement over how to integrate the RSF into the regular army, the SAF.
But that sounds almost like a technical discussion, about military structure. Why did that one point become so fatal?
Because it was never really technical. It was a proxy fight for who would have ultimate authority. The RSF, you have to remember, grew out of the Janjaweed militias.
Right.
And it became this incredibly powerful parallel military force. So the integration question was the ultimate test of control. Who gets the resources, who has the command structure, and ultimately who sets the political direction for the entire state.
So a zero-sum game.
A complete zero-sum game. It's all about who would control the military and, crucially, its immense economic footprint.
So this isn't about, patriotism or national defense. This is about balance sheets and control.
That's a very sharp way to put it.
It sounds less like an army and more like a collection of holding companies with guns.
And the sources completely validate that interpretation. I mean, the motivations are deeply rooted in financial control. The RSF in particular, they've built these incredibly lucrative economic networks. We're talking about control over gold mines.
Which is huge.
Huge, and extensive interests in cross-border trade, livestock, import licenses, you name it.
So that puts the fight for territory in a completely different light. It's not just about who holds Khartoum.
Exactly. The capital is symbolic, for sure, but the real long-term wealth is in these strategic, resource-rich territories. The sources point to key areas in Darfur and Kordofan.
Because if you control those...
If you control those, you control the revenue, you can sustain a war machine basically forever, completely independent of the central government's money.
And we can't forget this all blew up in a country that was already, on pretty thin ice.
Profoundly fragile. I mean, you had years of political maneuvering after Bashir was removed, really weak institutions. The second the SF and RSF stopped finding common ground, the whole state structure just had zero resilience. It shattered.
So what does the military map look like today? Because from the outside, it seems incredibly fluid.
It is intensely fluid. Recently, we've seen the SAF launch a pretty significant counteroffensive.
Around Khartoum?
Yes. They've reportedly managed to recapture some notable sections of the capital, which gives them a bit of a political win.
Okay. And what about the RSF's strategy?
Theirs is different.
Yeah.
They seem to be consolidating power out in the west, especially in Darfur. Their goal appears to be securing those long-term economic strongholds. It suggests more of a long-game strategy.
To become sort of an untouchable regional power, even if they don't hold the capital?
That's exactly what it looks like.
The price for all of this, of course, is paid entirely by civilians. We have to shift to the human cost now, because the UN describes this as one of the worst humanitarian crises on the planet.
And we need to sit with these numbers for a second to really get it. Over 11 million people are internally displaced. Inside Sudan.
11 million.
It's a massive sudden migration. And on top of that, millions more have fled across the borders into Chad, South Sudan, Egypt.
And when you have that kind of movement, what does that strain do to the surrounding countries?
It creates systemic instability. The pressure on these host communities is just immense. They're often already struggling, and suddenly they have to absorb huge new populations. It strains their resources, their infrastructure.
It turns a national conflict into a regional one.
A regional destabilizer, exactly.
And displacement, of course, leads directly to a food crisis, which is now shifting from, insecurity to confirmed famine. That's a terrifying word.
It is a devastating shift. I mean, the scope of need is overwhelming. You have around 30 million people who now need humanitarian aid just to survive.
30 million.
But the most disturbing thing from the sources is that official confirmation of famine, the absolute worst phase in specific besieged regions, in places like Fasher and Darfur and Kadugli in Kordofan.
So when the sources say famine, what does that actually look like on the ground? Are we talking about confirmed starvation deaths?
We are talking about systemic, catastrophic failure leading to starvation and death. It isn't just a bad harvest, it's a perfect storm of war. Food prices have skyrocketed, trade routes are blockaded, and the warring factions are severely, and it seems deliberately, limiting humanitarian access. Aid workers just can't get in safely.
So people can't afford food, and food can't be delivered.
And the result is mass malnutrition, which tragically hits children and pregnant women the hardest and first.
And if they survive starvation, they then face disease because any public health infrastructure has just completely dissolved.
That's how the crisis just multiplies itself. The healthcare system is collapsing.
Yeah.
I mean, hospitals aren't just damaged. Many are confirmed as destroyed, or they're just non-functional.
So no doctors, no medicine.
And no clean water, no sanitation. That has directly fueled major infectious outbreaks. We're dealing with a confirmed cholera epidemic.
Wow.
And that's on top of a high risk of malaria and other diseases. Simple illnesses become fatal.
And we also can't overlook the future cost. Millions of kids are out of school right now. This isn't just a lost year of education.
It's a generational trauma. When you can't educate an entire generation, you compromise any future attempt to rebuild a stable country. The impact of this will resonate for 40 years, not just 4.
Okay, let's turn to where the savagery of this conflict is most visible. The specific, documented atrocities that give a face to these staggering numbers.
We have to anchor this discussion in these events because they really speak to the intent behind the fighting.
The fall of Fasher and Darfur seems like a major example.
A huge one.
Reports indicate that after this 18-month siege, mass killings were allegedly carried out by the RSF.
That's right. This is the capital of North Darfur, a major strategic center. The sheer severity of the violence that accompanied its fall really underscores the RSF's tactics, brutal consolidation.
And this isn't isolated. There are devastating attacks elsewhere that seem to specifically target civilian life.
Absolutely. You look at the major market attack in Omdurman, in the Khartoum region, back in February 2025. It killed dozens of civilians.
Just people at a market.
People trying to survive. Whether it's intentional or just reckless, striking places where civilians gather is a clear pattern.
And the attacks on infrastructure seem particularly vicious. The drone strike on the Saudi maternal teaching hospital, also in Fasher.
Hitting a maternal hospital isn't just destroying a building. It's systematically removing the ability to care for the most vulnerable people in a society.
Meanwhile, the fighting just continues everywhere else. There are reports of shelling killing civilians in Kadugli in South Kordofan.
And when you put all of this together, it forms a deeply disturbing picture that confirms these widespread accusations of war crimes.
Such as?
Deliberate targeting of civilians, summary executions, and, crucially, the use of starvation as a weapon of war, which connects right back to those areas we mentioned that are now facing confirmed famine.
And there's a chilling gender component to this as well.
There is. Gender-based violence is being systematically reported across the conflict zones. Women and girls are just tragically exposed and vulnerable in all this chaos.
And what about the ethnic dimension? Especially in Darfur, which has such a painful history.
We cannot ignore that. The history of violence there is well known, and current reports suggest that an ethnic dimension is deeply ingrained in this new conflict. When one side is accused of these ethnically motivated attacks, it just adds a massive barrier to any future attempt at reconciliation.
And this is all happening against a backdrop of total economic collapse. The sources paint a picture of an economy that has, for all intents and purposes, just stopped working.
The indicators are just horrific. You're talking about massive currency devaluation, inflation that pushes basic goods completely out of reach for ordinary people.
And what about the core sectors?
Well, agriculture, which is a backbone of the economy, and the formal banking sector are largely non-functional. Exports have just ground to a halt.
Which means the system that pays for food, for imports, for services, it's gone.
Precisely. The result is huge unemployment and this desperate reliance on informal economies, on black markets, just to survive. And that economic spiral just feeds the desperation. It creates conditions where fighting becomes one of the only ways to make a living or control resources.
So we have a political deadlock, massive suffering, specific atrocities, and economic devastation. What are the realistic paths to resolution here? Are there any?
There was a flicker of diplomatic movement recently. The RSF did express a conditional willingness to agree to a U.S.-backed humanitarian ceasefire.
That sounds like a good headline, but the history here isn't very encouraging, is it?
Not at all. The immediate reality is that every single past ceasefire has failed, usually within hours or days. There's a complete lack of trust, and the truces are just too fragile.
So even if they sign a piece of paper, the obstacles to actually delivering aid are still there.
They're immense. Can you detail those for us?
Sure, you have ongoing fighting, you have targeted blockades, sieges. Control of territory is constantly shifting between heavily armed groups.
So it's just not safe for aid workers.
It creates extreme security risks for them and for the civilians trying to get to the aid. And on top of all that, there's a massive funding gap. The international community just has not kept pace with the scale of this crisis. Which leads us to the external dimension, because this isn't just two Sudanese generals fighting each other in a vacuum.
Absolutely not. The conflict has become internationalized. Sources confirm that the RSF is receiving various forms of support, financial, logistical, military, from regional players.
And when you have outside interests backing different sides,
It makes a sustainable internal solution incredibly complex. It often ensures the war just continues as long as that external support keeps flowing.
So let's synthesize all of this. We have massive refugee flows, economic collapse, external meddling. Why should the world care about this beyond the clear moral imperative?
The stakes are much higher than they might seem. First, regional stability is severely threatened. Sudan borders 7 countries. So these huge refugee flows are destabilizing the entire Horn of Africa. There's a real risk of spillover conflict. Second, there are global economic consequences. Disruptions to trade routes in a region connected to the Red Sea that carry systemic global risk. It impacts shipping, security.
And finally, the risk of war crimes and ethnic cleansing, especially in Darfur, puts a strain on the entire international legal system. It just signals a failure to prevent mass atrocities.
Precisely. The level of ethnic targeting requires a really robust global response focused on accountability. Otherwise, the message you send is that these crimes are permissible.
This has been a deeply challenging, but I think vital, deep dive. We've gone from that initial political struggle over military integration, which was really a proxy war for economic control, all the way to the full catastrophic human toll.
Wow.
We've covered the confirmed famine in El Fasher and Kadugli, the specific brutality of the Omdurman market attack, and why external interference and failed ceasefires make peace so elusive.
And if we connect all this devastation to the bigger picture, the long-term challenge is not just stopping the fighting. Given the severity of the ethnic tensions, the war crimes accusations, the complete devastation of Sudan's economy,
The biggest hurdle isn't just getting a truce.
the biggest hurdle is figuring out how to achieve genuine reconciliation and rebuild an entire state from essentially economic and administrative zero. What durable systems can you possibly put in place to ensure that the control over resources and governance doesn't just immediately relapse into armed conflict? How do you prevent this cycle from consuming the next generation?
That is the ultimate and I think provocative question that the global community has to confront.